Alright fellas, now I got a pretty interesting one for you today. A couple days ago, I saw this tweet going a bit wild on Twitter, tweeted by another YouTuber called Showbiz. If you follow boxing YouTube, you probably know who he is. Now, he also made a video on it, but the gist of it was there should be a no running rule in boxing enforced the same as no clinching. This is of course an idea launched as a response to the fights a couple weeks ago, which we all know was simply a horrendous watch. And although I completely agree with him that a lack of engagement is somewhat of a problem, I think a rule like he's suggesting is a slippery slope, and that there's way better ways in stopping the issue instead of adding another vague set of rules to be interpreted in a sport which already has a tremendous amount of issues surrounding reffing and judging. So, us as fans, and most importantly, paying viewers, never love to see a bout where either fighter doesn't really look like they want to box. Fighters going on the jog at times has been long criticised, yet what we saw last weekend was a bit of an anomaly. CompuBox has 40 years worth of boxing data, and in one weekend we saw a couple fights which topped the charts for all the wrong reasons, being some of the lowest punch fights in their 40-year history. 40 years of history broken in a couple days, but 40 years of not needing a rule, yet all of a sudden we needed to save our sport apparently. What we had last weekend was bad. It was borderline an insult to the paying viewer. But what it was at its core were two fighters who have always kinda had a back foot avoidance style, ramp that up a bit, and have two opponents in front of them who were not fast enough to catch them. And on top of that, neither chasing opponent tried to get out of first gear. And I'm not saying they just needed to cut the ring off, because that's not the answer. But overall, it was pretty much as bad of a stylistic matchup as you can get. And you might also be able to put the cherry on top with neither of the stars seeming to want to take it up a notch because they knew they had guaranteed future mega money fights down the line, and why would they want to risk it? Why would Canelo and Haney risk taking it up a notch just to appease the fans, when they knew what they were doing was enough to win rounds and all they had to kinda do was coast? I think there are a few more factors at play that resulted in the boring fights other than just going on the jog. Yet that still doesn't take away from the fact fighters being this avoidant is still a problem. As I said earlier, for the most part, what happened this weekend was an extreme oddity, with it being two massively hyped fights on one weekend going as bad as it can get. But in solving it, I think there is one clear thing you could do that's already within the rules, which would do a lot to curb the problem rather than opening up Pandora's box. Yet before I talk about what really should be done, let me talk about why I think changing the rules entirely is just not a great thing. So stick with me and it's all gonna kinda make sense. Now I do commend Showbiz for starting the discussion. Although I might not agree with him on everything, you can't take away from the fact of him being a legend of the YouTube scene. This is a discussion absolutely worth having. Hey, that's why I'm talking about it. His suggestion is there to be a rule set similar to the no excessive clinching rule set with a set of warnings and point deductions if needed. The one thing I did find funny about his video he made on it was he said if you want to actually talk about what the implications of this rule would be, hey, you're just overthinking it. And you're just emotional if you disagree. Which, when proposing a rule which could completely change the sport, why wouldn't you actually want to break it down? So, hey, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I just want to sprinkle a bit of brutal honesty in there. Now, with a no clinching rule, it's very easy to identify clinching. It's absolutely clear what clinching is and what clinching isn't. It's pretty straightforward. To be able to judge what purposefully trying to avoid engagement is a lot harder. Do you judge it on movement? Do you have to count the punches thrown? Is it crowd booing? Is it the vibe? The rule would be open to crazy interpretation. And boxing, if you haven't looked around, is one of the sports with some of the most inconsistent reffing and judging. We all watch boxing, and far too often we witness some of the most blatantly biased refereeing and judging present in any sport on the planet. So to stop running, we're gonna put the responsibility into the hands of the refs, who now have a tool up their sleeve to potentially stop running, but to also further whatever agenda they want. And the problem with Showbiz's idea and kind of whole video is that it's set within somewhat of a perfect world narrative. It's very easy to say, well, in a perfect world, this rule would be great when used correctly. But that would never happen. We're talking about the sport of boxing here. We all know what would happen if you made a set of rules like this official. To identify what running is and what isn't is kinda like handing over Pandora's box. In a perfect world, there's a clear answer. Look, we watch on TV, it's clear. But we don't live in that perfect world, and they're going to abuse it. And we only have to look over to our combat sports neighbour to see what radical change to increase engagement does to a sport. Muay Thai has a similar story. One Championship, the biggest promotion by far, decided when they came into the sport, traditional Muay Thai was boring. It wasn't fan friendly. So they introduced a whole new set of life-changing incentives for fighters, such as huge knockout bonuses, to encourage fighters to engage and mainly brawl. Alongside this, traditional fight pacing in rhythm control is now often seen as inactivity under one's global rules. That has resulted in One Championship changing Muay Thai at the top level forever. It is the major competition in the sport and has done its part in helping with the current death of multiple previously prominent Muay Thai styles at the top level. Although not exactly the same as the proposed boxing rule change, implementing radical change in favour of hugely increased engagement will have a massive impact on the sport. Saying there would be no implications for a rule change like this is a ridiculous take. It will definitely create, in theory, a more conventionally fan-friendly sport though. More knockouts, more brawls, but we will see the eradication of many styles and the way fighters approach fights. If you implemented these rules, unless they are rarely or barely enforced, it would radically change the sport. It would discourage many fighters to use backfoot styles, and it would all depend on what the ref would interpret as running. And do you trust boxing to do that? I don't particularly. Now, I think a bit of common sense is in order. Let's not add major radical rules which would only further confuse fighters and leave even more up to interpretation fueled by personal bias. But what we should do instead is make an obvious change that's within the rules. Now, of course with boxing there's one ring size, yeah? No, there isn't. To give a real quick history lesson, at the start of the last century in boxing they really used whatever they had, from 12 to 24 foot rings. Once a sport started to be standardized by commissions, they introduced having rings really anywhere between 16 to 20 foot. And that's kinda still the same for today. Although different commissions have their own rule sets, like the Nevada State Athletic Commission, aka Las Vegas, allowing fighters to have a ring between 18 and a whopping 24 foot. Most fighters in the common day fight at 20 foot or above rings, and in my opinion it's rarer to see a smaller ring than it is a massive one. So most fights are at the top end of that 16 to 20 foot scale. Canelo, for example, mainly fights in 20 foot rings. Of course, smaller rings favour pressure fighters and bigger favour more technical, yet why don't we just act within the rule and advocate to not use the top end of that scale? We don't have to get extreme, maybe push towards 18 foot rings as a standard. The couple feet will make it harder for fighters not to engage across the 12 rounds, but won't radically encourage the changing of the sport. Hey, it's already within the rules. And if you're Turkey organising a fight which might be trouble, say involving a Haney or a Scull, why wouldn't he push for smaller rings? Within a smaller ring, it makes it harder not to engage. It's quite a simple idea. It's within the rules, stop letting promoters use ring size to advantage their fighters and implement a standard which isn't big enough so a fighter can run for 12 rounds, but is still big enough where backfoot fighting isn't discouraged. I think it's quite a simple plan. But now I want to pass it over to you at home. What do you think? Do you agree with me, or do you agree with the rule change? Or do you have another idea entirely? I want to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, while you're at it, go watch Showbiz's video on the idea and go chuck him a sub. Yep, thanks for watching fellas, and I'll catch you in the next one.